Hi, I'm Colin Dunn. The subject for this video is influencing and negotiating. I taught negotiation skills to graduate students, and as a government employee, I negotiated for the government here in the States and overseas. But I had some vicarious experience in negotiation that was also valuable when my brother was appointed the chief negotiator for the United Nations with North Korea. Here's a picture of the negotiation table where he did his negotiations. On the left, you see the North Koreans. On the right, you see the UN negotiators. My brother said there was a lot of tense moments, but also some rewarding moments in his time there. And with all of that experience, I've come to understand a basic thing about negotiations, and that is this. Negotiations is not child's play. It's not child's play. It's not two people coming to the table and just dividing up a pie. It's two people coming to the table and using principled negotiations, trying to make that proverbial pie bigger by adhering to principles of negotiations that I'm going to share with you today, what I call the 3 keys of negotiations. The first key of negotiations is know the person. Know what I call the other side of the negotiation table. Know that person or persons. The second key is know the art of negotiation. Know the various strategies you can use in negotiation. And the third key is know the issue and plan the negotiation. Put the negotiations in writing. Let's talk about knowing the other side, knowing the person first. Why is that important? Well, that's important because half of negotiations is about the relationship as well as the issue that you're negotiating. Start by trying to find common ground. Talk common ground at the beginning. Maybe there's something you can agree on before the negotiations ever begin about the subject on which you're negotiating. Or perhaps there's something else you can agree upon. You might go into the office of somebody and you might notice on the wall a picture of that person you're going to negotiate with in a sailboat. And you might be able to talk about your shared love of sailing. Why do you do that? Because when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating an atmosphere of agreement before the negotiations ever begin. Another tip is to appreciate the other side. Find a way to appreciate the other side. Let's say you're going into the boss and you're going to negotiate a raise. What if you started this way? Boss, I really appreciate the way you carve out time in your busy schedule to talk to each one of us on the team, and you listen carefully to our concerns. Well, why do you do that? Simply because you're showing respect for the other side before negotiation begins. And by you showing respect to the other side, they're going to show you a little more respect. One way to really respect what people are and what they say in negotiations is to listen carefully to everything that's being said by the other side. Ed Brodow, who is the chief negotiation consultant for companies like Microsoft and the McDonald's Corporation, he says he likes to use the 70-30 rule, the 70-30 rule, where he tries to listen 70% of the time and talk 30% of the time. He says one way to do that is to ask open questions of the other side. Questions like, what's most important to you about this issue? And then listen carefully to what the other side has to say. Another approach is to do what I call paraphrasing on steroids. That's where at some point in the negotiation, you stop and to understand the other side, you try to restate more eloquently than the other side has already stated their own position. You stop and you say, let me make sure I get your position on this right. You're saying this, and then you restate that position more eloquently than the other side has already stated their own position. And then you say, do I have that right? Why do you do that? Well, you do that because when you do it, the other side looks at you and says, oh, Colin gets it. He understands me. And your stock rises in the other side's book. In fact, the other side might even give you more credit for your judgment because you understand them so well. And that credit for your judgment is going to pay big dividends in the negotiations that follow. Paraphrasing on steroids. A lot of different ways you can do that. One time, I was invited to the office of an HR vice president, and this person wanted to hire me to come do a leadership workshop in her company. She'd seen me do one. She thought it would be good. I came to see her, and she said, "Colin, fortunately, we can't do the workshop." She said, "My boss just doesn't buy into this. He says, bringing all the managers together for a day or two with you in a leadership workshop, all that's going to result in is lost production online." I said, "Okay." And I tried to paraphrase on steroids. I said, "It sounds like the issue we're wrestling with is this. You can't show return on investment for the time the managers are gone. You can't monetize that and show the boss what the payoff is going to be." She said, "That's it. That's my problem." She did that. I got the job. But I wouldn't have gotten the job if I hadn't paraphrased on steroids. Try this with your teenagers sometime. If you don't have a teenager at home, borrow one. My friend recently had a son who came to him and said, "Dad, I need the family car. Thursday night. Me and 6 of my buddies are going to a concert out of town." My friend paraphrased on steroids and said, "So let me get the idea right here. What you're saying is you and 6 of your buddies, all 7 of you, are going to get into our 5-passenger family car. And you're going to drive out of town to a concert on a school night during a semester where your grades aren't very good, and 2 of your friends had recent brushes with the law." The son said back to the father, "Well, Dad, the way you talk about it, that sounds like a crazy idea." Paraphrase on steroids. It'll help you in your negotiation. The other thing you can do about knowing the other person is know what the other person's underlying interest is. Behind every position, there is usually an underlying interest. When the U.S. was negotiating with the Soviet Union for the number of nuclear warheads each side had, and they came to the table in the early 1960s, the U.S. decided that 30 inspections in both countries was what was necessary to make sure the warheads were kept at the right level. The Soviet Union said, "No, 6 inspections is all we really need." Neither side would budge. As a result, no treaty was signed. A few administrations later, the parties came back to the table and focused on the underlying interest. What was that? Their underlying interest was to prevent nuclear Armageddon, to prevent a nuclear holocaust that would destroy the world. And once they focused on that issue that they both agreed with, that underlying interest, then both parties came together and signed a treaty. Know what that underlying interest is. It may be useful in you coming to the right kind of negotiations conclusion that you want. The reason we do all of this is because of a fellow named John Knox. The reason we try to appreciate the other side and listen to the other side is because of what he said in part. He was a 16th century theologian, and he said this: "It is not possible to antagonize and influence at the same time." If your approach to negotiation is going head-to-head with somebody and getting under their skin and irritating them, that's probably not going to help in the long run. Instead, be more conciliatory. Show respect for the other side. That's the key to success. This next principle is know the art of negotiation. Know the strategies. On the screen here, you see a picture of a statue of a guy named Aristotle. Aristotle is the founder of our Western philosophy, much of our Western thought. Aristotle wrote a book called The Art of Rhetoric. In that book, he identified the 3 basic elements in an argument, in a piece of persuasion. Those 3 elements are the ethos, the pathos, and the logos. What's the ethos? Well, the ethos is, do I trust this person that's trying to convince me of something? When I started this video, you might recall I mentioned that I taught negotiation skills in a graduate school. And that was an attempt to create a kind of a positive ethos to get you to buy into my ideas and to look at me as a credible source. What's the pathos? The pathos is the emotional appeal of the argument. It's, does this feel right? I had a son who visited 3 college campuses and chose one. I asked him why he chose the one he chose. He said, "Dad, when I walked on that college campus, it just felt right." There is an emotional appeal, an emotional sway to the argument we should not overlook. The third element is the logos. That's the logic of the argument. That's, does the argument make sense? Is the evidence compelling? Is the analysis complete? What I'm afraid most of us do, though, is we focus too often and too carefully at only one of these. We focus at the logos level. We look at the logic, the reasons why we're right about something, the reasons why our argument is sound. And we ignore the ethos and the pathos at our peril. Let's put it all together. Let's use the example of you going to ask for a salary increase from your boss. When you walk in the room, you're carrying with you your ethos, your credibility. What is that based on? It's based on the trust your boss has in you. And that trust is built on relationship, which we already talked about, but it's also built on your reliability. Have you kept your word? Are you a person who keeps your word? When you give someone your word, can they take that to the bank? Are your projects and the work that you do, are they accurate and reliably done every time? That's your ethos, your credibility. The second thing is the pathos. What is that in asking for a raise? That might be the notion that you're telling the boss how indispensable you have been to the team's successes, how much a part of the team you are, and at the same time, how much you appreciate the value the team has for other organizations and what you have contributed to the culture of the team that makes it valuable. What's the logos? Well, that's the stuff that you can do in the future, your potential, the value that you add to the team for upcoming projects. That's your track record on the projects in the past that have been successful. That's the logos. All 3 of them come together in an argument, and all 3 should be attended to in negotiation. Another idea, another concept, is called the concept of the ratifier. What's the ratifier? Well, that's a person who is not in the room, but who is a decision maker or an authority of some kind. When you go to buy a car, you know who the ratifier is. It's the sales manager. Because at some point in the conversation, the salesperson says, I can't approve what you're asking for here. Let me go talk to the sales manager. Why not turn the tables around and have a ratifier on your end? The ratifier for you could be your spouse who's not present with you at the point of the sale. And you could tell the salesperson, look at the options, the prices for the options you're asking me to pay for this car. My spouse is never going to buy that. Let's come together, you and I, and see if we can sweeten the deal so that she will approve it. What just happened? What just happened is you changed the perspective, the dynamic of the negotiation. Now the salesperson is coming alongside with you to collaborate on a position that the spouse will approve. See, changing perspective is very, very important. Metaphorically, what you're trying to do in changing perspective is this. You're trying to get the other side not to look at you as a combatant, right? But to come around the table with you to the front of the table and stand side by side with the person you're negotiating with, the other side. And you're both looking at the issue together as a team. It's not combative negotiation, it's collaboration. It's not intense negotiation, it's problem solving together. And when you make that kind of a change, it has a positive effect on your negotiations. Now, one way to demonstrate that is through humility. Humility. For example, if somebody comes to me and says in a negotiation, Colin, your position A is wrong because of B, C, and D. One way I could respond that would demonstrate humility and perhaps change perspective a little bit is to say this: I may be wrong. I frequently am. Let's come together and look at the issue and look at the facts behind the issue and see if we can ascertain the truth. That subtle change can help you, and it can pay big dividends in the negotiation process in the long run. Another thing to remember is time is your friend. Time is your friend. When the other side states their position emphatically, one of the things you can do is not say anything in return. Just look at the other side and nod thoughtfully and be quiet for a while. Your silence generates the condition where it might so happen that the other side now is planting a seed in their mind about the doubt of their own position just because you're quiet. Mark Twain said it this way: there are many effective words, but none so effective as a rightly timed pause. Like that one. The other thing you can do is extend the break, extend the silence. You can, at some point in the negotiation, say, you know what, I think we've gotten a lot accomplished. Can we take a break now and resume again tomorrow? That'll give me time to think more deeply about your position and more clearly about the issue in its entirety. Most people will agree with that quickly on the other side. Now, what you don't tell them is this. You don't tell them that during this break, that night, you're going to go back and you're going to think deeply about their position, and you're going to figure out a way to paraphrase on steroids their own position back at them at the beginning of the negotiations the next day. Don't tell them. Time is your friend. There are many rules, there are many tactics. I've just given you a taste of some of them. But remember this: there are no rules. Because every negotiation is a little different. Every negotiation carries with it different implications based on the parties involved and the issue being negotiated. The only rule is there is no rules. There are principles. There are keys on which you can rally, around which you can rally. And we've just given you two of those keys. One, focus on the other person. The other key is know the art. Know the art of negotiation. What's the third key? Well, that's coming up on the next slide. The third key is know the issue and plan. Know the issue and write a plan before you do the negotiations. One of the things in your plan ought to be your desired outcome. What's your desired outcome? Well, that's the outcome that is best for you. If the negotiations ended in a way which you dreamed they would end, that's the perfect outcome. Write that down. Secondly, write down your ZOPA, your zone of possible agreement. What do I mean by that? I mean, you have your best possible outcome, and then you've got your least acceptable outcome, and then there are outcomes in between. Write all those down. Define that zone of possible agreement. The third thing you can do is write down your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiation agreement. What is your BATNA? Your BATNA is what you fall back on if negotiations fail. If negotiations break down and you can't agree with the other party, your BATNA is what you pull out of your back pocket and say, well, this is what we're going to have to do. For example, going back to that car sale, you're talking to the salesperson, you talk to the sales manager, and you can't agree, and you've used all the tactics you can think about. You've had a ratifier involved maybe, and you've tried to appreciate the other side. None of it's worked. What do? You tell the person your BATNA, which is what? I'm going to another dealership. What about that discussion you have with your boss about a raise? What's your BATNA there? Well, your BATNA, if your boss and you can't agree on an outcome that's acceptable to you, your BATNA might be a job offer that you pull out of your back pocket to another agency. If you come up with the right BATNA, when you pull it out and present it to the other side, sometimes that encourages them to reach an agreement more favorable to you. When we do negotiations, I ask people to fill out a negotiations worksheet that looks like this. Write down the issue, the interest for yourself, underlying interest for your position, and if you can find out the underlying interest for the other party, the desired outcome, the zone of possible agreement, or ZOPA, and the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or your BATNA. How would this look for, say, the example of the teenager who wanted to go to a concert in another city? What would the father write down for his negotiation worksheet? He would say the issue is the concert on school night. His interest, the father's interest, is safe return of the son, safety of the son. Maybe that's the most important interest he has. Maybe the son's interest is independent fun. What's the desired outcome from the father's perspective? Stay home and study. That's what he desires to get out of the negotiation. That's his best possible outcome. What's his ZOPA, or a zone of possible agreement? It might be everything from don't go, there's stay home and study. It might be find a weekend concert closer to home. And at the bottom end, the lowest acceptable level might be, okay, you can go to the concert, but I'm going to chaperone you, and I'm going to drive a bigger car to get you guys there. What's the BATNA the father has? Retain the car keys. Retain the car keys. Filling out one of these worksheets before the negotiation can be very helpful, because if you fill it out and write it down, when your mind is clear, when you get into the heat of the negotiations, you'll be better off. Let me leave you with a final thought. There's two gentlemen sitting at the table negotiating. One says $65,000. The other one says $100 million. And the caption underneath says, thanks to compromise, they were moving closer. This is child's play. This is not real negotiations. This is just coming together to talk back and forth about one particular issue and compromise in between. Real negotiations, the powerful negotiations that you need to do at work and at home, are principled negotiations, following the principles or keys that we talked about today. Know the person, know the other side, know the art of negotiation, and know the issue, and write a plan. Before I leave you, let me suggest a couple of things you could do for further reading. One book by Tom Colosi is the book that's used at business schools and used by the State Department. It's a very thorough discussion of principled negotiations. The second book, Getting to Yes, is an easy-to-read book that's kind of a primer for negotiations. I recommend them both to you. Let me finish by saying I hope that the ideas I presented to you today will help you in your negotiations, in your work life and in your home life. Thanks for watching.